Welcome. You're listening to Detective Duo, bringing you tales from the golden age of mystery, adventures in the spirit of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford. Tap subscribe to stay with us and share where in the world you're listening from. Breakfast at South Audley Mansions had reached that tranquil toast and marmalade stage which Tommy Beresford always considered sacred. The wireless murmured faintly, the kettle steamed companionably, and sunlight bounced off the polished sideboard in a way that promised London would be tolerable for at least an hour. Tuppence, however, was frowning at the Daily Mail. "Honestly," she said, lowering it, "is everyone in the city being swindled by someone? If I see one more headline about blackmail, I shall take it up as a hobby." "Darling, you'd have a flair for it," Tommy replied, buttering toast with military precision. "A sort of philanthropic blackmailer. Send me £10 or I'll expose you for being excessively dull." Before she could retaliate, the doorbell gave a single apologetic buzz. Albert, their eternally rumpled man of all work, appeared carrying a silver tray on which lay a single envelope. "Found this under the door, Mrs. B," he said. "No stamp. Thought it queer." The envelope was plain, cream, and unaddressed. Tommy reached for it, but Tuppence was faster. She held it up to the light, frowned at the faint watermark, and slit it neatly with her fruit knife. Inside lay one sheet of cheap paper covered in heavy block capitals. "If you value your reputation, place £50 in notes in an envelope and leave it behind the fern in the entrance hall tonight. You will be watched." There was no signature, no hint of who it might be for. "Good heavens," said Tommy. "We've become accessories before breakfast." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "It's not addressed to us, but someone thought it should come here." Albert leaned forward. "Maybe a joke, missus. The lads downstairs is fond of practical jokes. Last week they sent the charwoman a fake eviction notice." "No," said Tuppence slowly. "Look at the type. It's done on a cheap portable, ribbon nearly dry. And the phrasing, 'You will be watched.' That's not a prank. That's fear wearing its Sunday best." Tommy folded his napkin with exaggerated calm. "Then, my dear, either we summon the police or finish breakfast. I vote for the latter. One must face crime on a full stomach." But Tuppence wasn't listening. She was studying the paper under the window light. "There's something else," she murmured. "Hold it slantwise. You can see indentations. Someone wrote another note on top of this one with carbon paper underneath. We've got the ghost of its twin." Tommy joined her, curiosity overcoming appetite. Indeed, faint ridges spelled fragments of words. "Second payment, no excuses, tomorrow night." "A series," said Tuppence. "This writer's been at it for a while." "Meaning," said Tommy, "there's a blackmailer operating from our very doorstep. South Audley Mansions enters the annals of crime." Albert looked worried. "You ain't planning to poke your noses in again, are you? Last time Mrs. B got locked in a coal cupboard." "Occupational hazard," said Tuppence briskly. "But this is different. Whoever wrote this is desperate. Look at the uneven spacing, hands shaking. A professional blackmailer wouldn't tremble." "So, an amateur," Tommy mused. "Which is worse, someone clever or someone clumsy?" Tuppence reached for the phone. "Neither. Someone cornered. I'm ringing the desk porter." The elderly concierge, Mr. Pringle, answered with his usual funereal tone. No, he had not seen anyone near the Beresfords' door that morning. Yes, a few residents had received anonymous letters recently. Cranks, most likely, but he'd paid them no mind. When Tuppence replaced the receiver, her eyes were shining. "There, others have had letters. That makes it systematic." Tommy sighed. "My love, we were supposed to go to the theatre tonight." "We still might," she said airily, "if we find our blackmailer by curtain up." She paced the room, thinking aloud. "Someone in this building is frightened. They received this sort of letter, panicked, and tried to hide it by slipping it under the wrong door. Or, Tommy interrupted, the blackmailer posted it through the wrong door. Even blackmailers make mistakes." "Either way," Tuppence declared, "we can't ignore it." Albert cleared his throat. "Beggin' pardon, but it could be meant for you two. You're detectives, sort of. Maybe somebody's testing you." Tommy chuckled. "Our reputation precedes us, eh? The League of Adventurers returns." But Tuppence remained serious. "No, this smells of fear, not fun. I'd wager one of our neighbours is paying through the nose for something foolish they did long ago." She crossed to her bureau, pulled out their well-thumbed notebook labelled Cases Minor and Miscellaneous, and scribbled a new heading, The Blackmailer's Letter, SAM Building. "Let's start by listing suspects," she said, purely hypothetical. "There's Miss Iris Dane, actress, dramatic temperament, and letters from gentlemen. Dr. Gray, nervous disposition, therefore ideal victim material. Colonel Merivale, retired, proud, and probably with a scandal tucked in his kit bag. And our landlady, Mrs. Hogg, knows everyone's business, which is practically a qualification for extortion." Tommy grinned. "We'll have the entire tenants' committee in the dock by lunchtime. Better that than ignore it." He leaned back, watching her. There was a glow in Tuppence's eyes he recognized from their early adventures. Domestic peace, however pleasant, never quite dulled her appetite for intrigue. "Very well," he said. "Let's proceed scientifically. First principle, verify the handwriting, or in this case, the typing. We'll ask to borrow something trivial from each neighbour, perhaps a note about the water pressure, and see who owns a machine with that tired ribbon." "Excellent," said Tuppence. "And you, dear heart, can check with Pringle whether any odd letters were reported before. If several tenants have been pestered, the culprit's circle widens." Albert watched them with resigned admiration. "You two make crime sound like a picnic." "It is, Albert," Tommy assured him. "A picnic with wasps." By mid-morning, the flat had taken on that peculiar hush which falls when its occupants are hatching a plan. Tuppence laid out the letter, a magnifying glass, and several envelopes from their own correspondence for comparison. "See the corner crease," she said, "folded hastily, not neatly. Whoever did this was interrupted. Perhaps they were posting several at once and heard footsteps." "And the lavender smell?" asked Tommy, sniffing. "Lavender furniture polish," she replied instantly. "Pringle uses beeswax. Mrs. Hogg's stairs, however, reek of lavender. File that away." Tommy nodded gravely. Duly filed under miscellaneous aromas. The telephone rang again, this time a hesitant female voice. "Mrs. Beresford, forgive me for disturbing you. This is Miss Dane from downstairs. You haven't, by any chance, received a peculiar letter this morning?" Tuppence exchanged a glance with Tommy. "Why do you ask?" A pause crackled down the line. "Oh, nothing. Only I thought I might have misplaced some correspondence. Silly of me." Click. Tommy exhaled. "That settles it. Someone is terrified." "And not very good at hiding it," Tuppence murmured. She replaced the receiver and stared out the window at the genteel bustle of Mayfair below, the milk cart clattering, a taxi hooting, a gentleman scolding his spaniel. Ordinary life continued, serenely unaware that somewhere within these brick walls fear was writing anonymous notes. "Tommy," she said softly, "do you ever feel London's full of secrets stacked on top of each other like these flats, one per floor?" "Frequently," he replied, "usually when I'm waiting for the lift." She laughed, the tension easing. Yet the envelope on the table seemed to mock their levity, its folded edge like a sealed mouth refusing to speak. "We'll open every mouth in this building before long," Tuppence vowed. Tommy raised his teacup in salute. "To detection before dinner." "Before lunch, if you please. I refuse to chase villains on an empty stomach." Albert re-entered with a dustcloth. "Shall I keep the letter safe, Mum?" "No," said Tuppence thoughtfully. "We'll keep it right there, visible. Let whoever sent it wonder if we've understood its meaning." She smoothed the paper once more, her fingertip tracing the faint indentations of the unseen message. A chill ran through her. Somewhere in South Audley Mansions, someone else had read the same words, perhaps even written them. "We're being watched," she said quietly. Tommy glanced toward the curtained window. "Splendid. Let's give them a good show." The clock on the mantel struck 10, precise and implacable. Outside in the corridor, footsteps paused, then moved on. A door closed softly, sealing the morning's calm behind it. Tuppence looked at the envelope one last time, her resolve settling like armour. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "we'll find you before you write again." And with that, the Beresfords' breakfast resumed. Cold toast, cooling tea, and the unmistakable scent of danger wafting through the comfortable London air. By that afternoon, with the morning's letter propped on the mantel like a challenge, Tommy remarked over his second cup of coffee, "You realise this could be construed as snooping of the most ungentlemanly kind." "Nonsense," said Tuppence, fastening a small hat at a rakish tilt before the mirror. "It's social curiosity. Every civilised building has it. The difference is that I'm using mine for science." Tommy eyed her warily. "Scientific snooping, then," I stand corrected. "Someone in this house is frightened," she said, smoothing her gloves. "And frightened people talk, if one gives them the illusion of safety." That, Tommy thought, was Tuppence in essence, equal parts charm and interrogation. He watched her sweep out of the flat like a visiting duchess and decided his own contribution would be less conspicuous. He'd have a word with Pringle, the concierge, whose loyalty to the management made Scotland Yard look leaky by comparison. The corridor outside was bright with afternoon light filtering through frosted panes. Tuppence paused, pretending to adjust a hairpin while listening to the faint hum of conversation from the lower landings. A door opened 2 floors below, followed by a waft of lilac perfume and the unmistakable trill of Miss Iris Dane's laughter. "My dear doctor," Miss Dane was saying, "if I want a physician's advice, I'll send for one, not trip over one in the corridor." Tuppence descended lightly, the perfect spectator. Iris Dane was exactly as advertised, tall, exquisitely dressed, and equipped with a pair of eyes that looked accustomed to secrets. Facing her stood Dr. Leonard Gray, slim, pale, and clearly miserable. "I was only—" he began. Yes, I know. You were only being solicitous. Men always are, until they discover gossip is cheaper than flowers." She turned sharply and nearly collided with Tuppence. "Oh, Mrs. Beresford, isn't it? You must forgive me. I was just explaining to Dr. Gray that actors are like cats. We dislike being startled." "Perfectly understandable," said Tuppence pleasantly. "I should have thought doctors, of all people, would be used to melodrama." Dr. Gray gave a thin smile. One never grows immune to it. Tuppence's eyes darted between them. There was tension here, not the ordinary quarrel of neighbours, but the brittle silence of people who share a secret they cannot name. "Are you going down to tea, Miss Dane?" she asked. "In a moment, perhaps." The actress's tone softened. "One must keep up appearances, mustn't one? Even when the critics aren't watching." She disappeared into her flat with a rustle of silk and the faint slam of a door. Dr. Gray stared after her, colourless. "If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Beresford," he murmured, "I've surgery calls to make." He hurried off, leaving Tuppence with an impression of guilt pursuing him down the stairs. The smell of polish and cabbage met her halfway down to the basement, where Mrs. Hogg reigned supreme among mops and moral judgment. The landlady was a small, round woman with a permanently disapproving expression and an apron so starched it could have stood upright. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hogg," said Tuppence, all geniality. "I was just admiring how spotless everything is. One could eat off these banisters." "Not if you value your stomach, madam," said Mrs. Hogg grimly. "Clean or not, people touch 'em. You'd be surprised what passes through these halls after midnight." Tuppence widened her eyes with polite interest. "Really? I thought the building most respectable." "Respectable to look at," Mrs. Hogg sniffed. "But I know things, Mrs. Beresford. Unpaid rents, mysterious parcels, comings and goings after dark, and quarrels. I've heard 'em through my floorboards. Not that I listen, of course." "Of course not," said Tuppence soothingly. "Still, it must be lonely keeping house for so many secrets." Mrs. Hogg eyed her sharply. "I mind my own business, madam, and I'd advise you to do the same." There was a pause heavy enough to slice with a butter knife. Then, as if regretting her tone, the landlady added, "You'll have to excuse me. The Polish dries quick." Tuppence watched her march away, the lavender scent of her cleaning solution trailing behind like a signature. Meanwhile, Tommy had installed himself at the concierge's booth with the air of a man studying troop movements. Mr. Pringle was polishing keys and discoursing on the moral decline of tenants who neglected tipping. "Nothing but trouble since the war," he said mournfully. "People think they can do as they please. Post comes at all hours, odd letters with no return address. Gives one the shivers." "You've had several then?" Tommy asked, feigning mild curiosity. "Half a dozen, maybe more. All from the same district. Bloomsbury postmark. Cheap envelopes. I burned one myself after a lady complained. Smelled fishy." "Any idea who the letters were for?" "Different names each time. Actors, doctors, colonels. You'd think it was a census for sinners." Tommy thanked him gravely and made a note in his pocketbook. Bloomsbury, a detail he meant to pass to Tuppence at once, so they could trace it to a likely stationer's shop. He returned upstairs to find his wife waiting on the landing, leaning against the rail with an air of studied indifference. Well, she asked. Bloomsbury postmark. Repeated pattern. Our Blackmailer likes stationery with intellectual associations. Mine likes lavender polish, said Tuppence. So, postmark from him, polish from here. Same chain, 2 ends. Mrs. Hogg is an encyclopedia of half-heard scandals, and she hinted she knows more than she ought. Tommy grinned. Excellent. Between us we have a postal code and a cleaning product. We're practically ready for Scotland Yard. Hush. Tuppence's finger went to her lips. From below came the rise and fall of voices. Miss Dane again, sharp with indignation, and Dr. Gray's muffled protest. You can't keep demanding, she cried. I've nothing left to give. A door slammed, then silence. Tuppence exhaled. That was no rehearsal. Tommy frowned. If Gray's the blackmailer, he's a clumsy one. If he's the victim, he's a very quiet sufferer. Either way, she said, we'll find out which by supper. They moved discreetly toward the stairwell. The hallway smelled faintly of perfume and anxiety. The other flats were quiet, too quiet as though listening. At the far end, Colonel Merivale emerged from his door, impeccably brushed, moustache bristling like a cavalry charge. "Afternoon, Beresfords," he boomed. "You heard the racket, eh? Damned nuisance, these theatricals. Should be a law against renting to actors." "Oh, I rather enjoy a little drama," said Tuppence. The Colonel harumphed. "Women always do. Nothing in it but nerves, I expect. Dane's a flighty piece, Gray's a milksop. Good riddance to both, if you ask me." "You seem to know them well," Tommy observed. "No. I've eyes, sir, and ears. And I'll tell you something. Someone in this house is playing a dirty game. I've seen letters slipped under doors after midnight. Not addressed, mind you, just slipped." "Indeed?" said Tuppence, her pulse quickening. "Indeed. And if I catch the scoundrel, I'll thrash him within an inch of his life. Good day to you." He marched off, leaving the faint smell of pipe tobacco and indignation. Tommy turned to Tuppence. "Our first corroborating witness." "And our first suspect," she returned crisply. "He knows too much to be innocent." They climbed back toward their flat, their footsteps echoing. On the landing outside their door, Tuppence paused, listening. The air was still, but something, a shift of draught, a hint of lavender, made her glance back. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. "What?" "Someone opened a door just now, watching us." Tommy waited, but no sound came. Only the faint hum of London through the windows, car horns, laughter, the ordinary world oblivious to intrigue. "Nerves, old thing," he said gently, "or intuition, which is usually worse." "Perhaps," she said, "but this building has begun to breathe differently. Listen long enough and you can hear it whisper." She looked down the stairwell where the polished banister gleamed and the doors stood closed, each one hiding its own story. "Whisperings on the landing," she murmured. "That's what we'll call this case if we ever write it up." "Provided we survive to sign the contract," Tommy said cheerfully. He held open their door and together they stepped back into the flat, warm, ordinary, safe. But as the door shut, Tuppence thought she heard a floorboard creak above them, soft as breath. Someone, somewhere, was listening, and the whispering, though faint, had only just begun. The bell over the shop door gave a dry little tinkle, the kind that sounded like it had been warning people not to steal pencils since Queen Victoria's day. The Beresfords stepped inside, leaving behind the noise of Bloomsbury's pavements for the muffled quiet of ink, dust, and paper. It was the sort of stationers that looked unchanged by war, peace, or progress. Rows of wooden drawers labelled quills and nibs, ledger paper, royal, and wax seals, assorted colours. The air smelled faintly of glue and something medicinal. Behind the counter, a thin man with silver spectacles peered up from a ledger, his expression as pale as the paper he sold. "Good morning," Tuppence began, in the bright voice that usually made policemen tell her everything, and vicars blush. "We were hoping to inquire about some stationery." "We do sell it, madam," the man said solemnly. "What kind of stationery?" "The kind used for writing unpleasant letters," Tommy murmured. The shopkeeper blinked. "Sir?" "Ignore him," said Tuppence quickly. "I wonder, did you happen to sell a quantity of this paper and envelope combination recently?" She slid a sheet from her handbag, the blackmailer's letter, folded just enough to hide the words. The man adjusted his spectacles and bent over it with reverence. "Ah, economy series, ivory wove, foolscap size, We sell dozens weekly, but—" He paused, fingertips brushing the grain. "This batch, yes, I recall. Slight defect in watermark alignment. 2 weeks ago, a gentleman bought half a ream and matching envelopes. Polite fellow. Wore gloves." "Gloves?" Tommy echoed. "Unusual for shopping." "Black leather," the man said. "Immaculate. The sort you polish, not wear." He smelt. A frown wrinkled his forehead. "Rather like my late mother's sideboard. Lavender polish. Very strong." Tuppence's eyes flickered. "Did he leave a name?" "On the receipt, yes. Mr. J. Smith, which fooled nobody. The address he gave was Fitzroy Square. There's no such number." Tommy leaned on the counter. "Did you happen to notice anything else? Height, voice, marital status, secret political affiliations?" "Average height, soft voice," the man said patiently. "One of those faces that looks borrowed from somebody else. And he paid in exact change, which I always distrust." "Quite right," said Tuppence. "People who count shillings carefully always have something to hide." She thanked him with a smile that left the shopkeeper looking vaguely flattered and faintly terrified, and the Beresfords stepped back into the grey afternoon. Bloomsbury was busy with students and booksellers, the air alive with traffic and the distant chime of church bells. They began walking toward Russell Square, where a small tea shop offered sanctuary and cheap scones. "Well," Tommy said, once seated, "we've discovered a middle-aged phantom with lavender-scented gloves. The perfect suspect. Shall we arrest everyone who smells like furniture?" Tuppence buttered a scone with unnecessary energy. "You're missing the point. Lavender polish, not cologne. Furniture polish. Where have we smelled it before?" Tommy pretended to think deeply. "Everywhere from my grandmother's dresser to Mrs. Hogg's staircase." Tuppence looked triumphant. "Exactly. Mrs. Hogg polishes those banisters herself. I nearly slipped on them yesterday, and our mysterious gentleman smells the same." "So you think Mrs. Hogg moonlights as a middle-aged man in gloves?" "Don't be obtuse," she said. "It means our blackmailer spends time somewhere that reeks of the same polish. Possibly Mrs. Hogg's office, or her flat." Tommy regarded her fondly. "You realize you're about to accuse our landlady of conspiring with a man who buys discount stationery. If you can propose a better line of inquiry, darling, do." He smiled. "I can propose a sandwich." "You had one," she retorted. "When one is in pursuit of a criminal mind, digestion is secondary. On the contrary, I do my best thinking on a full stomach." "Which explains," she said sweetly, "why your best thinking takes place in restaurants." He raised his teacup in salute. "Touché." After tea, they paid a visit to the nearest post office, a red brick building that smelled of damp envelopes and authority. Tuppence, ever resourceful, produced the letter again under the pretense of inquiring about paper quality. The clerk, a sandy-haired young man, squinted. "Postmarks our branch all right. Batch dated the 10th, about a fortnight ago. We've had a few odd customers lately, sending registered envelopes with no return address, always from the same box near the corner." "Would you recognize any of them?" Tommy asked. "Afraid not, sir. We handle hundreds a day. But I do remember one fellow who asked for change in 10-shilling notes. Most people prefer pounds." "Did he smell of lavender?" Tuppence asked suddenly. The clerk blinked. "Can't say as I noticed, miss. He had gloves, though, black. Bit fancy for posting letters." When they stepped outside again, Tuppence was thoughtful. 2 witnesses, same description. The man exists, at least. But why Bloomsbury? It's miles from South Audley Mansions. "Perhaps he likes long walks," said Tommy. "Keeps the blackmailing muscles supple." She ignored him. "No, it's deliberate. Bloomsbury's anonymous, too busy to notice who posts what. He's clever enough to distance himself from his victims." "Or she," Tommy suggested. "I refuse to be bound by pronouns," Tommy said, and Tuppence answered, "Then we'll bind him by address when we go back today and compare his paper to ours." "She?" Tuppence repeated. "Why, do you suspect Mrs. Hogg in disguise again?" "Could be anyone. Even you, confessing through third parties to keep the excitement alive." "Tommy Beresford," she said, eyes narrowing, "if you were ever to receive a blackmail letter from me, you'd find it scented with roses, not lavender." "And would it demand money or affection?" "Both, naturally." They laughed, and for a moment the tension broke. But the humour faded as Tuppence's gaze fell upon a passing charwoman carrying a tin of polish, the very shade of lavender blue they'd smelled in the stationer's. The sight stirred her memory, Mrs. Hogg's stout silhouette bending over the railings, the same tin beside her. "It's not coincidence," she murmured. "That smell ties them together." "Maybe she supplies polish to all of London," said Tommy, but his tone was less certain. They took a cab back toward Mayfair as twilight crept in, painting the shop fronts with gold. Tuppence leaned against the seat, thinking aloud. A man who uses gloves to buy stationery suggests carefulness, maybe vanity. But lavender polish? That's domestic. It doesn't suit him. "He could be a servant," said Tommy, "a butler with literary ambitions. Or someone hiding where servants live, a lodger perhaps. Mrs. Hogg rents out her attic rooms. Then he may have access to every letterbox in the building." "Exactly. And that would explain how the envelope reached our door by mistake." Tommy considered this. "You realize, darling, that if you're right, we're living directly above a blackmailer. Wouldn't be the first time we've had interesting neighbours." The cab jolted over cobblestones. Street lamps flared to life one by one, and London shifted into its evening hum, the whisper of tyres, the clatter of a newspaper boy, a gramophone leaking jazz from an open window. When they arrived back at South Audley Mansions, the hallway was dim except for the amber light from Mrs. Hogg's office. The door stood slightly ajar. Inside, they could hear the rhythmic sound of polishing, cloth against wood, soft and persistent. The scent of lavender hung heavy. Tuppence tiptoed to the threshold and peered in. Mrs. Hogg was bent over her desk, sleeves rolled up, rubbing the surface with fierce devotion. A small radio murmured dance music. On the desk beside her lay several envelopes, plain, cream, identical to the one they'd found. Tuppence nudged Tommy. His eyebrows rose. She knocked lightly. "Evening, Mrs. Hogg," burning the candle at both ends. The woman started, then smiled stiffly. "Evening, Mrs. Beresford, can't abide dust. Gets into everything." Tommy's gaze lingered on the envelopes. "You must go through reams of stationery." "Oh, these?" she said quickly. "Old tenants left them behind. Waste not, want not." She gathered them up and tucked them into a drawer. "Very thrifty," said Tuppence. "I'm frightfully fond of good paper myself. One can tell a lot about people from what they write upon." "That's so," Mrs. Hogg said, eyes cool. "Some folks write too much, if you ask me." The pause that followed was long enough to hang pictures on. Then Mrs. Hogg smiled again, rather tightly. "Now then, you're blocking my polish, if you don't mind." "Of course," said Tuppence, backing away. "We'll leave you to your varnishing." Out in the corridor, Tommy let out a low whistle. "My love, if looks could kill, we'd be addressed in black capitals ourselves." Tuppence's voice was soft. "She's hiding something. Those envelopes, identical to the blackmail ones." "Coincidence?" "Coincidences are just clues waiting for courage." He offered his arm. "Then let's be courageous over dinner." "Tomorrow," she said, determination bright in her eyes. "Tonight, I mean to find out where she buys her polish." "Heaven help Bloomsbury," Tommy muttered. But as they climbed the stairs, the faint scent of lavender followed, lingering, cloying, and unmistakably purposeful. It seemed to rise from the very woodwork, as though the building itself were whispering secrets through its polished skin. And somewhere in one of those closed flats, a gloved hand might even then be folding another ivory sheet, sliding it into an envelope, sealing it with quiet satisfaction before midnight came again. "If you must interrogate a lady," Tommy said, straightening his tie in the hall mirror, "it's wise to arrive armed, chocolates, flattery, and a decent excuse." "You have a deplorably cynical mind," said Tuppence, slipping on her gloves. "We are not interrogating, we are inquiring, and I have the perfect excuse." She held up 2 theatre programmes she had purchased that morning. The Golden Hour, starring Miss Iris Dane, was printed across them in elegant italics. Tommy inspected them. "Front stalls, extravagant. You might have married for love, but you spend like a critic." "It's called establishing cover," said Tuppence. "Now stop fretting, and let's see whether our glamorous neighbour's nerves can stand an honest conversation." Miss Dane's flat on the 2nd floor was a masterpiece of reflected charm. Mirrors everywhere, large gilt ones, small oval ones, even a fan-shaped one above the mantelpiece. They multiplied the light, the flowers, and Miss Dane herself, who appeared in them like a succession of nervous butterflies. "Mrs. Beresford," she exclaimed as Tuppence was announced by her maid, "how perfectly lovely of you to drop in. Won't you sit down? Tea, Clarice." Her voice was the trained instrument of an actress, warm, trembling, half a note from laughter and half from tears. She wore a gown the colour of pale champagne and held a cigarette in a hand that shook almost imperceptibly. "You're very kind," said Tuppence. "I wanted to thank you for recommending that little florist in Knightsbridge. The lilies lasted nearly a week." "Oh, yes," said Miss Dane vaguely. "Lilies always do, long after one wishes they wouldn't." She smiled suddenly. "Forgive me. You didn't come to hear an actress ramble about flowers. How can I amuse you?" Tuppence took out the programmes. "As it happens, I was hoping to buy 2 seats for your new play. My husband adores an evening of tragedy." "How touching," said Miss Dane. "But the theatre's booked through next month. Still, I might—" She stopped, the smile faltering. "Forgive me. I've had rather distressing letters lately. You'll think me absurdly jumpy." "Letters?" Tuppence's tone was mild, casual. "Anonymous ones," said Miss Dane, twisting her cigarette in the tray until it went out. "Not the usual sort. No money demands. Just reminders of a thing best forgotten." "Something from your past?" Miss Dane laughed brittly. "From everyone's past, my dear. The war was full of little tragedies, wasn't it? People doing things they'd rather forget. Signing papers, telling lies, falling in love where they shouldn't. It was chaos wrapped in duty." She crossed to the window, gazing down at the street below. Her reflection in the glass looked ghost pale. "There was a man," she said softly. "A good man. We were both involved in something delicate, forged documents for refugees. He was caught. I wasn't. The letters say his death wasn't accidental. They say someone paid for my silence." Tuppence's voice was gentle. "And did you?" "Pay?" Miss Dane turned sharply. "I paid every day since." There was a moment's silence, broken only by the faint ticking of a French clock. Then she laughed again, with deliberate lightness. "You mustn't take me seriously. An actress without melodrama is like a teapot without steam." "Still," Tuppence said, "if you've been threatened—" "They're not threats," Miss Dane interrupted. "They're warnings, as though someone wants me to remember. I've destroyed them all, but the words stick. You owe a debt to the dead." "Such nonsense." Tuppence studied her. Beneath the powder and charm, fear had etched fine lines around the woman's eyes. "Perhaps you should show one to my husband," Tuppence suggested. "He has a very steady mind." "Steady minds frighten me," Miss Dane murmured. "They see too much." Clarice returned with tea and quietly withdrew. Tuppence accepted a cup. It was delicate rose china, perfumed faintly with rosewater, that subtle, haunting scent that seemed to follow Miss Dane wherever she moved. "You use rosewater," said Tuppence conversationally. "Always. My mother swore by it." "So, not lavender?" The question was innocent enough, but Miss Dane's hand froze mid-gesture. For one instant, something raw crossed her face. Alarm, then calculation. "Lavender? No, never. It gives me headaches. Why do you ask?" Tuppence smiled. "Oh, nothing. I was only remembering the stair rails downstairs. Quite overpowering." "Ah, yes. Mrs. Hogg's mania for cleanliness. I sometimes think she polishes that banister to keep herself from throttling the tenants." The actress had recovered her poise, yet her fingers trembled as she poured more tea. "Do you think she knows everything that happens in this building?" Tuppence asked lightly. "Mrs. Hogg? She likes to know. But real secrets slip past her. It's always the quiet ones who notice. Colonel Merivale's maid, for instance, that little mouse with eyes like pinholes. She smells of lavender, too. Perhaps she helps with the cleaning." "Perhaps," said Tuppence thoughtfully. When she returned to their own flat an hour later, Tommy was waiting by the window with the air of a man about to deliver judgment. "Well, Holmes," he said, "did the lady confess to masterminding a criminal empire?" "Not exactly," said Tuppence, unpinning her hat. "But she admitted receiving anonymous letters, different in tone from ours. Not blackmail. Reminders. Something about the war, forged documents and a dead man." Tommy whistled. "A melodramatic mix. Our neighbours grow more interesting by the hour." "She was terrified," Tuppence said quietly. "She hid it behind charm, but her hands gave her away, and when I mentioned lavender, she flinched." "Yet she claims she uses rosewater," Tommy mused. "Yes, and she insists that Merivale's maid uses lavender, which ties her neatly into the scent trail we've been following." "You mean," said Tommy, Our middle-aged man in gloves may not be a man at all. Or may have help, said Tuppence. Tommy crossed to the mantel and tapped the ash from his pipe. Suppose for a moment that Iris Dane is telling the truth. She's not being blackmailed for money, only haunted, and that started before today's money notes began appearing. Someone wants to break her nerves. Why? Guilt, said Tuppence. A person racked with guilt will pay anything, even silence. He studied her face. And you think she might be the real target behind the letter we found? Possibly. Or she's lying brilliantly and sent it herself to divert suspicion. In which case, Tommy said, she's either a very good actress or— Exactly, Tuppence cut in. A professional one. There was a pause, then Tommy smiled wryly. You realize, of course, we're now tangled in at least 3 motives, 2 scents, and 1 possible ghost from the war. It's progress, said Tuppence briskly. Confusion always precedes clarity, Tuppence said, drawing a line under the day's inquiries, and tomorrow we see which of them panics first. Later that evening they met again in the corridor. The house was quiet except for the tick of the stair clock and the faint echo of a wireless from somewhere above. Tuppence had been restless. She decided to fetch a book from the sitting room. As she passed Miss Dane's door, it opened suddenly. The actress stood there, her face pale beneath its powder, eyes wide as if she had been crying. "Mrs. Beresford," she whispered, please don't go on asking questions." "Why ever not?" "Because curiosity kills more than cats. I shouldn't have said what I did. It's dangerous to remember." "Dangerous for whom?" Miss Dane looked down the corridor as though expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "You don't understand," she said hoarsely. "There are debts that don't end with peace. Some of us lived through things we weren't meant to. If you keep prying, someone will end up dead." Before Tuppence could reply, she slipped back into her flat, closing the door softly behind her. Tuppence stood motionless, heart beating faster than she liked to admit. The mirror opposite reflected her own startled face, and she could have sworn a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall. But when she turned, there was only emptiness, and the lingering scent of rosewater fading into the dark. Back inside their flat, Tommy looked up from the evening paper. "You look as though you've seen Hamlet's ghost." "Possibly," she said. "Only this one wears silk and speaks in riddles." She poured herself a glass of sherry and sat down. "Tommy, I think we've stirred something dangerous. Iris Dane's terrified, but not of the police or scandal, of retribution." "For the war business?" "Yes. And there's someone else mixed up in it. Perhaps the person who's been writing these letters. Whoever it is, they're close. Too close." "Then perhaps we should step back a pace," he said. "We can't," said Tuppence, eyes dark with determination. "She as good as warned me someone will die. That means someone already plans it." "You do realize," said Tommy, "that investigating murder before it happens is notoriously bad for the nerves." "Nerves," she replied, "are for people with nothing at stake." He sighed, lighting his pipe. "And what, pray, do we have at stake?" She looked at him across the lamplight. "Only the difference between justice and fear." Tommy gave a short laugh. "Spoken like a heroine from the golden hour." "Flatterer," said Tuppence. "Now stop talking. I need to think." She leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the letter still pinned to their notice board. Its block capitals seemed to watch her, stark and silent. Below, the building settled into its nocturnal hush. A door clicked somewhere, footsteps retreated, and faintly from Miss Dane's flat, a record began to play, a scratchy old tune about love in wartime. Then, almost imperceptibly, another sound joined it, the slow creak of the stairs and the faint scent of lavender drifting under their door. "You can't simply drop in on a retired colonel," said Tuppence as she adjusted her hat. "It has to be engineered." "Nonsense," Tommy replied, knotting his tie with military precision. "Retired colonels live for visitors who'll listen to their campaigns. I shall mention Eton, cricket and the Empire, and we'll be served tea before you can say Waterloo." "And while you flatter his service record," said Tuppence, "I'll do the unpatriotic thing and snoop." "You'll do it beautifully," said Tommy. "Just don't get court-martialed." Colonel Merivale's flat occupied the sunny corner of the first floor, high-ceilinged, full of mahogany and the faint smell of tobacco. The door opened before they could knock twice. "Beresford, Mrs. Beresford, capital of you to come." The colonel was a tall, florid man in his 60s, with a clipped moustache and the kind of handshake that tested loyalty. Come along in, won't you? I've been meaning to return Mrs. Beresford's magazine. Dashed interesting article on espionage, what? Entirely fictional, I assure you, said Tuppence demurely. He laughed and ushered them into a drawing room dominated by regimental portraits and a glass case displaying a ceremonial sword. A small fire burned in the grate, lending the room the coziness of an officers' club. "Clarissa? Tea?" he bellowed toward the kitchen. The maid appeared, small, quiet, pale, and withdrew again with a nod. Her eyes, Tuppence noted, were colourless but watchful, and the faint scent that followed her into the room was unmistakable. Lavender. So the maid uses it indeed, Tuppence thought. "Splendid girl," said the colonel, settling himself. "Silent as a church mouse. Just how I like my staff. Now then, Beresford, you were in intelligence during the war, weren't you?" "Clerical division," said Tommy modestly. "Ah, the quiet ones who win wars," Merivale said approvingly. "None of this jazz about heroes and medals. Duty, discipline, discretion, that's the ticket. Dash it all, those were the days. Not like now. Blackmailers, cowards, parasites. Vermin, the lot of them." The word cracked through the air like a whip. Tuppence saw the veins in his temple pulse. His joviality dimmed for a heartbeat before returning. "Vermin?" she repeated lightly. "Exactly so, preying on good people. Decent officers, widows. Had a friend of mine taken in last year, disgraceful." He snatched up the teapot, pouring with unnecessary force. "If I ever met one of those fellows, I'd wring his scrawny neck." "Let's hope you never do," said Tuppence, her tone mild. "Ha! Indeed. Sugar?" She accepted, all charm and smiles, while Tommy steered the conversation towards safer ground. India, hunting, and regimental cricket. Merivale warmed visibly, recounting an anecdote about an escaped tiger and a batman with nerves of steel. As he gestured expansively, the maid entered with a fresh tray of sandwiches. Tuppence caught another faint whiff of lavender. Clarissa's hands trembled slightly as she set down the plate. "That will be all," said the colonel curtly. The girl vanished soundlessly. "She's new, isn't she?" asked Tuppence. "Came 6 months ago. Keeps herself to herself. A good servant knows when not to hear things." He gave a short laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Tommy raised an eyebrow at Tuppence, the signal that their host was dodging more than conversation. When the colonel excused himself to fetch a photograph album, Tuppence's instincts sprang to life. "Quickly," she whispered. "We shouldn't," Tommy began. "We should," she said firmly. "I want to see his desk." She crossed the room with quiet grace, bending to the broad walnut desk near the window. Papers were stacked with military neatness, except for one drawer slightly ajar. Inside she glimpsed stationery, cream paper, thick quality, with a torn corner exposing faint blue fibres. She slipped one sheet free enough to feel its texture, identical to the blackmail letter. Her pulse jumped. She leaned closer. Beneath it lay an envelope, half crumpled, and a small shred of carbon paper. "Tuppence!" Tommy hissed. She froze. The colonel's heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. With deft fingers she nudged the drawer closed just as he re-entered, carrying an album under his arm. "Here we are," he boomed. "Taken at Simla, '09. Ghastly uniform, but splendid moustache." Tommy glanced at Tuppence, who was serenely buttering a scone. "Indeed," she said smoothly. "The resemblance is unmistakable." Merivale chuckled, flipping the pages, but his laughter sounded forced, like an actor waiting for his cue. "You must have travelled widely," she continued. "All over," he said. "India, Africa, France. Served the Empire proudly till the end. Came home with a chest full of medals and a heart condition. Nothing but good memories." "Not even one or two you'd rather forget?" The question slipped out lightly, but his hand paused mid-page. "My dear lady," he said slowly, "every soldier has ghosts, but we keep them disciplined." There was a silence filled only by the ticking clock. Then Tuppence smiled as though the matter were trivial. "Of course. Still, the smell of lavender does take one back, doesn't it?" He looked up sharply. "What?" "Lavender," she repeated, unruffled. "Your maid uses it. I thought I caught a trace when she served tea." Something changed in his face. The genial colonel vanished, replaced by a flicker of raw anger. "My late wife used lavender," he said stiffly. "Clarissa uses what I tell her to use, nothing more." "How devoted," murmured Tuppence. The colonel's composure returned, but too late. His jaw tightened, He fumbled to change the subject. "Now then, Beresford, you must see this picture of my regiment. Finest fellows in India." Tommy, pretending not to notice the tension, leaned forward politely. Tuppence sipped her tea, her mind racing. The reaction had been too strong, too defensive. Lavender, again. When at last they rose to leave, Merivale insisted on escorting them to the door himself. "So good of you both to call," he said, recovering his bluff manner. "We must do it again soon. Always glad to talk with people who appreciate the old ways." "Indeed," said Tuppence sweetly. "And the old sense." His eyes flickered again, but he merely bowed them out. They descended the stairs in silence until they reached the street. The afternoon had turned dusky. Across the courtyard, the windows of South Audley Mansions glowed faintly. "Well," said Tommy, hands in pockets, "what's the verdict? Harmless eccentric or guilty as sin?" "A guilty eccentric," said Tuppence. "He's hiding something in that drawer, paper identical to the Blackmail letter. He may not be the writer, but he's connected." "Could be coincidence," Tommy said. "Military men are tidy. They buy stationery in bulk." "With carbon paper?" she countered. "And what about that reaction to lavender?" "Sentimental. Wives and scents. Emotional minefields." "No," said Tuppence firmly. "That was fear." For a moment he looked as if someone had struck him. Tommy frowned. "And if he's involved, where does Iris Dane fit in?" "We'll find out soon enough. He may be protecting her, or blackmailing her. Either way, they share a past." A light breeze stirred the courtyard trees. Tuppence looked upward. A movement in one of the windows caught her eye. "Tommy," she whispered. He followed her gaze. On the opposite side of the square, a curtain fluttered. Behind it, just for a second, a shadow shifted, a silhouette of someone watching them. Then it was gone. "Someone's taking an interest," Tommy said quietly. "Yes," she murmured, "and whoever it is uses patience as a weapon." They turned toward the street, their footsteps echoing against the cobbles. "What's our next move?" he asked. "We wait," said Tuppence, "and listen. This building talks if one knows how to hear it." "What shall I listen for?" "Lavender," she said simply. That evening, Tuppence sat at her dressing table, replaying every word of the Colonel's conversation. The mirror reflected her thoughtful face and the dim glow of the bedside lamp. On the table lay the theatre programme from Iris Dane's flat, now smudged with fingerprints. Tommy, sprawled in an armchair, read the Evening Standard. "It says here, someone burgled a flat in Knightsbridge last week. No forced entry." "Knightsbridge," she murmured. "That's where Iris's florist is." "Coincidence?" "No such thing." The faintest knock interrupted them. Albert's voice followed, muffled through the door. "Beggin' pardon, Mrs. B, but there's someone loitering across the courtyard again. Same hat and coat as yesterday." "You're sure?" "Certain. Tall chap, keeps glancing up at our windows." Tommy put down the paper. "So our watcher's back. Excellent. It's nice to be popular." Tuppence crossed to the window and drew the curtain slightly aside. Across the courtyard, in the pool of lamplight near the gate, stood a figure. Indistinct, motionless. For several heartbeats neither moved. Then the figure turned and vanished into the dusk. Tommy exhaled. "I do wish our admirers would send calling cards instead of chills." "They already did," said Tuppence softly. "Ours came without a name, remember?" She let the curtain fall, her reflection merging with the glass. In the stillness, the faintest scent drifted through the open window, unmistakable lavender, soft and persistent as breath. The morning began with Albert's whisper at the breakfast table, the sort of whisper that instantly made Tuppence put down her toast. "There's a bloke outside again," he said, eyes wide. "Been there half an hour. Easy. Tall and thin as a broomstick. Keeps reading the same page of the evening news." Tommy lowered his cup. "Hat?" "Pulled down. Proper suspicious. Like you don't want the hat or the head to be recognised." Tuppence rose and went to the curtain. A discreet parting revealed the courtyard below. A man stood opposite, half hidden by a plane tree. Even from above, his posture spoke of patience, too still, too deliberate. "He's not sightseeing," she murmured. "He's waiting." "Could be a suitor for Mrs. Hogg," Tommy offered. "Her admirers tend to lurk." "Don't be absurd," said Tuppence. "Mrs. Hogg's only admirer is herself." She turned from the window, mind already in motion. "If he's watching, we'll give him something to watch for." An hour later, Tommy found his wife at the writing desk, surrounded by stationery. "You're not writing your memoirs, I hope." "Something far shorter," she said. "A decoy." The letter she had typed was perfect. Block capitals, clipped phrasing, identical in style to the blackmail notes. "The truth must be paid for. Deliver by midnight." She slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and scrawled a meaningless address. Mr. H. Walker, 9 Mayfield Terrace, W. "No such person," she said, "no such address. But if our observer takes the bait, we'll know he's part of the same game." "How do you intend to make him bite?" "By being careless," said Tuppence, with the air of an actress preparing a matinee performance. That afternoon, she strolled out of South Audley Mansions carrying her handbag conspicuously, the envelope protruding just enough to be seen. Tommy followed at a distance, looking like a gentleman out for a casual walk, though his eyes missed nothing. Tuppence stopped at the corner postbox, hesitated, just enough for an audience to notice, then slid the letter in. She turned on her heel and walked briskly away. Tommy lingered behind a delivery van. The man by the plane tree lowered his newspaper. His movement was fluid, practiced. He waited until Tuppence vanished round the corner, then strolled, too casually, toward the postbox. Tommy's heart quickened. The man reached inside, fiddling with a thin wire loop, a collector's trick. In a blink he drew the envelope out and slipped it into his pocket. That was enough. Tommy stepped out. "Afternoon," he said pleasantly. "Nice day for a bit of mail fraud." The man started violently, then bolted. The chase was pure London theatre. Down the narrow lane behind the grocer's, past a startled charwoman with a bucket, through the side streets of Mayfair where sunlight bounced off polished cars. Tommy followed, his hat flying off somewhere near Shepherd Street. "Stop that man!" he shouted, which naturally made 3 men stop the wrong one. The runner darted left, leapt over a railing, and vanished into a mews. Tuppence, appearing from the far end like an avenging angel, blocked his escape. "Really?" she called. "You'll ruin your shoes." He spun, doubled back, and collided with Tommy. They went down in a heap of flailing limbs and newspapers. When the dust settled, Tommy had the upper hand and the man's hat. "You're not from the Evening News," he said grimly. The fellow glared up, breathing hard. "Get off me, will you? I've done nothing wrong." "You stole a letter," said Tuppence, stepping closer. "That's wrong enough." "Didn't steal. Retrieved. Part of me job." "Indeed? And what job is that?" asked Tommy. "Debt collection." The man rubbed his arm resentfully. "Name's Jack Pole. I collect for private clients. I was told to keep an eye on a certain address and pick up any suspicious post. That's all." "Who told you?" He hesitated. "A lady. She's particular." "Particular about blackmail, perhaps," said Tuppence. "About her reputation," he shot back. "And if you think I'm saying her name, you're mad. She'd ruin me." Tommy exchanged a glance with Tuppence. The phrase was too pat, too rehearsed. "Look here," Tommy said. "You've been watching our building for days." "Why?" Pole scowled. "Orders. Said to keep watch for any letters with block writing. My client's had nasty ones lately. She's frightened of scandal. That's all I know." "Describe her," Tuppence said. "Middle-aged, well-dressed, lives respectable, paid in cash, doesn't want the police involved." "How original," murmured Tuppence. "Look, I'm no crook," he insisted. "I just deliver messages, sometimes pick up envelopes, no questions asked, easy money." "You call that easy?" Tommy asked, glancing at his torn sleeve. Pole looked sullen. "Easier than being honest." Tuppence studied him closely. The man's hands were ink-stained, the nails short, the coat frayed. He looked more tired than wicked. A pawn, not a player. "And you've no idea what's in the letters?" "Not my business. But you recognize this one." "It looked like the rest," he said defensively. "The same paper. My client said if any more turned up, bring them straight to her." "Where does she live?" "I told you I can't—" "Bloomsbury," Tuppence interrupted sharply. His eyes flickered, betraying just enough truth. "Ah," said Tommy softly, "so our scent trail circles back again." Pole's jaw set. "You'll get nothing more out of me." "We could call the police," said Tuppence. "They won't believe you," he said flatly. "I'll tell them you planted it to trap me. You're not the first busybodies to meddle." Tuppence smiled faintly. "No, but we're usually the last." A constable eventually appeared, drawn by the commotion. Tommy's credentials, remnants of wartime intelligence, persuaded him to let the Beresfords handle the matter privately, with a warning to "Keep the peace, sir." They released Pole near Berkeley Square, watching as he melted into the crowd, still muttering about women and trouble. As they walked home, Tommy broke the silence. "You think he was telling the truth?" "Partly," said Tuppence. "He's no mastermind, but he knows the woman behind it, and she's using him to keep the correspondence out of sight." "A client afraid of scandal," Tommy mused. "Could be Iris Dane, frightened by her own ghosts. Or Mrs. Hogg, who lives on gossip like others live on air. Or the Colonel's mysterious widow in spirit form," said Tommy lightly. "Don't joke," said Tuppence. "We're moving from whispers to action now. Someone is paying men to watch, to intercept letters. That means panic." They reached the building. The windows of South Audley Mansions glinted dully in the evening light. The world went about its business, a milk cart rattling past, the distant cry of a newsboy, while their own small web of intrigue thickened unseen. Albert met them at the door. "He came back," he blurted. "That same fella, the thin 'un, only this time he weren't watching. He was talking to Mrs. Hogg." "Mrs. Hogg?" "In the back courtyard. Looked like she was giving him what for. Then he tipped his hat and scarpered." Tuppence's lips tightened. "So the landlady and the watcher are acquainted. Curious friendship." Tommy whistled softly. "That settles one thing. Our lady client lives very close indeed." Later that night, the Beresfords sat by the fire. The letter Pole had tried to steal lying between them on the table. "You realise," said Tommy, "we've now got a chain linking Bloomsbury, Mrs. Hogg, and a hired man with poor running technique." "And a woman in the middle, clever enough to remain unseen," Tuppence added. "You think it's the same person who wrote the original blackmail notes?" "Possibly, or perhaps the opposite. Someone trying to destroy the blackmailer's trail before the letters reach the victims." Tommy frowned. "That's an optimistic interpretation." "Not necessarily. Fear makes people destroy evidence. Guilt makes them preserve it." He smiled faintly. "Darling, sometimes I suspect you'd make an excellent criminal." "Flatterer," she said absently. "Pass me the letter again." She studied the envelope, tracing the faint imprint of type through the paper. "See that shadow? The letters aren't pressed evenly. Whoever typed this was nervous, or inexperienced." "Jack Pole said he only delivered them," Tommy reminded her. "Exactly, which means the woman typed them herself, and she's close enough to risk being seen posting them." So we circle back to South Audley Mansions. "Always," said Tuppence. "The hive hums loudest near home." Before turning in, Tuppence crossed to the window. Across the courtyard, lights glimmered in a few flats. Colonel Merivale's curtains were drawn. Miss Dane's remained open, her silhouette moving back and forth like a restless ghost. Tommy joined her. "Still at it, I see. Rehearsing tragedy?" "Or living it," Tuppence murmured. "She warned us someone would die if we pried too far." "You don't believe in warnings?" "No, but I do believe in patterns. Every piece leads closer." "And what pattern do you see now?" She turned slightly, her gaze thoughtful. "Lavender. Always lavender. It follows us from corridor to corridor, letter to letter. It's the thread that ties them all." Outside, a movement drew her eye, a shadow slipping past the far hedge, too quick to identify, yet familiar. "Tommy," she whispered, "someone's there again." They leaned out just in time to see the courtyard gate swing shut. A faint scent drifted up, caught in the cool air. Lavender once more, unmistakable. "He's gone," said Tommy. "Yes," said Tuppence softly, "but not far. Whoever's watching doesn't need to run. They already know everything worth seeing." The clock on the mantel chimed 9. Somewhere above, a door closed, deliberate and slow. The building settled into uneasy quiet, every creak suddenly significant. Tuppence turned from the window. "We'll need another trap," she said. "This time, not for the messenger, for the hand that writes." Tommy nodded. "And if that hand happens to wear lavender gloves?" "Then," she said, smiling faintly, "I'll shake it before I break it." Albert's knock came before breakfast, 3 rapid taps that carried panic through the wood. Tuppence, halfway through buttoning her blouse, called, "Come in!" He burst through the door, pale and breathless. "Mrs. B, it's Miss Dane, she's dead." The world seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Tommy looked up from his razor. "Dead?" "Flat 4B, Mrs. Hogg sent me. Said you'd better come quick. She looks awful." Tuppence was already reaching for her coat. Don't just stand there, Tommy. No need to shout, he said grimly, wiping the soap from his chin. I'm coming. The corridors of South Audley Mansions felt different that morning, hushed, heavy, as though the building itself were holding its breath. The familiar scent of lavender polish had been joined by another, sharper odour, bitter almonds. Mrs. Hogg stood outside flat 4B, wringing her hands like a woman trying to scrub away guilt. She's gone, poor soul. Must have taken the lot. Dr. Gray's inside now. The police too. Tuppence brushed past her. Who found her? Clarissa, Colonel Merivale's maid. Said she smelt gas, but it weren't gas. Sleeping draught, the doctor says. There's a note. Tuppence's stomach twisted. A note. How convenient. Inside, the flat was dim, curtains drawn against the pale morning light. Miss Dane lay on the chaise longue, a fragile statue in a silk dressing gown. Her head rested to one side, fair hair spilling across a cushion like melted gold. On the table beside her stood a small bottle marked chloral hydrate and a single sheet of paper. Forgive me, I can't pay any more. Tommy's voice was low. That's all? All that matters to the police, said Dr. Gray, turning from the body. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot. Overdose. Classic case of despair. Poor woman. She was frightened, not despairing, said Tuppence. The detective sergeant by the door cleared his throat. We've seen this before, madam. Blackmail. Victim runs out of funds, the end's always the same. Tuppence crossed to the table, ignoring his tone. May I? The sergeant hesitated. Tommy produced his most reasonable smile. My wife's got a knack for detail, Sergeant. Harmless hobby. She bent over the note. The handwriting was familiar but not identical to the blackmail letters. The ink, darker, wetter, had pooled slightly where the pen lingered. She touched it with her fingertip. Still damp, she murmured. She must have written it just before the sergeant began. Or, said Tuppence, someone wrote it afterwards. The man bristled. Now see here. But she was already sniffing lightly at the paper. Lavender, strong, too strong. Women dab it on their handkerchiefs, he said defensively. Not on their suicide notes, she countered. Tommy intervened quickly. Perhaps, Sergeant, you'd allow us a minute alone. We knew Miss Dane rather well. My wife would like to collect her impressions before they fade. The sergeant sighed. You've got 5 minutes. Don't move anything. When the door closed, Tuppence spoke in a whisper. Tommy, look at her wrist. He leaned closer. The skin bore a faint mark, not from a bruise, but pressure, as though something had been held there. Not self-inflicted, he said quietly. And no glass nearby, said Tuppence. If she'd swallowed that dose, the bottle wouldn't be standing upright and corked. You think she was murdered? I think someone wanted us to think she wasn't. She moved about the room, scanning the surfaces. The place was too tidy. Dressing table immaculate, drawers closed, not a single sign of struggle or disorder. The only untidy element was a torn envelope lying half beneath the rug. Tuppence crouched, pulling it free. Half the flap was missing, but the addressee remained visible. Dr. Leonard Gray, South Audley Mansions. Her eyes met Tommy's. Well, well, he murmured. Our good doctor's name keeps popping up like a bad penny. And in her flat, she said softly. Tell me that's normal correspondence. Dr. Gray had withdrawn to the kitchen, chain-smoking in agitation. Tuppence approached him with the envelope hidden behind her back. Doctor, she said gently, I'm so sorry. You must have been fond of her. Fond? He gave a short, bitter laugh. She was my patient, and my neighbour. I told her to rest, to stop worrying about shadows. She didn't listen. You received letters too, didn't you? He looked up sharply. How did you? We know, she said quietly. We found one. They were typed, weren't they? Demands for money. Promises of exposure. Gray's cigarette trembled between his fingers. Yes, but I burned mine. I wanted to forget. And yet, she said, producing the torn envelope, she kept one, for you. He stared at it as if she'd handed him a weapon. I never wrote to her, he said hoarsely. I swear it. Then why address a letter to yourself? Tommy asked. Maybe she was warning me, he whispered. She said once that she knew things about the war, things that could ruin people. Did one of those people live here? Gray crushed the cigarette. Ask Merivale. He knew her in France. Everyone forgets how small the world was in 44. Did he love her? Tuppence asked. He pitied her. There's a difference. And Mrs. Hogg? Said Tommy. Mrs. Hogg pities no one, Gray muttered. The police left by noon, satisfied with their verdict. The body was taken away discreetly. The sergeant promised an inquest, but not enthusiasm. When the door shut behind them, Tuppence felt an odd ache. Not just sorrow, but anger. Iris Dane had been alive, terrified, only hours ago. Now she was a story the building would whisper about over tea. Mrs. Hogg reappeared, clutching her apron. Terrible thing. I warned her about them sleeping pills. Always told her, mixing your remedies ends badly. But actresses never listen. She seemed calm yesterday, said Tuppence. Calm, Mrs. Hogg snorted. You should have heard her at midnight, pacing, muttering. Claimed someone knocked on her door, but there wasn't a soul about. You're sure? I checked myself. Empty as a church. And you didn't notice anyone leaving the building early? No one I'd say so of. Except that Colonel's maid again, fetching the morning milk. Clarissa, said Tuppence. She's an early riser, isn't she? She's a nuisance, said Mrs. Hogg with relish. Quiet as a cat. Makes me nervous. Tommy thanked her and guided Tuppence back upstairs. So now we've got a dead actress, a frightened doctor, and a maid who tiptoes at dawn. Any preference which to interrogate first? None, said Tuppence, pausing by their flat. Because whoever killed her might already know we're looking. Meaning? She handed him the envelope. This was left deliberately, not dropped. It's bait. That afternoon the mansion simmered with subdued excitement. Neighbours whispered behind doors. The lift boy swore he'd seen a man in a dark coat leaving before sunrise. Gossip bred faster than evidence. Tommy and Tuppence sat at their dining table, the envelope between them, as though it might start confessing on its own. She was scared, said Tuppence softly. She warned us not to pry. And she was right. Now she's dead. And she knew too much, said Tommy. About someone here, Merivale perhaps, or Mrs. Hogg. Or Dr. Gray himself, Tuppence countered. His manner in that kitchen wasn't grief, it was guilt. He looked guilty because he isn't guilty, Tommy said. That's often how innocence behaves. True criminals, my dear, pour the tea and ask after your rheumatism. That's why I married you, she said dryly. For the philosophy. He smiled faintly. What now? We go back, said Tuppence. There's something in that room the police missed. They returned at dusk, Albert trailing nervously behind as lookout. The police seal across the door was easily lifted and replaced, one of Tommy's less admirable talents. Inside, the air had turned cold. The lavender scent was stronger now, sweet and cloying, masking the bitterness of chloral. Tuppence moved like a cat, scanning every surface. She didn't write that note here, she said at last. The table's too clean and there's no ink bottle, no pen either. Tommy knelt by the wastebasket. Paper ash, burned quickly. She was destroying something before she died. Or while someone watched her do it, said Tuppence. She opened the wardrobe. Dresses hung neatly, but on the floor lay a crushed powder box. She picked it up, rose-scented, not lavender. She never changed perfumes, she murmured. Someone touched this after she died. A faint sound behind them made both turn. Albert's voice whispered from the door. Someone's coming, Mrs. B. Tuppence darted to the window. Across the courtyard a light flickered in Colonel Merivale's flat. A shadow moved against the curtain, tall, deliberate, bending over a desk. He's burning something, said Tommy. They watched as the shadow fed paper to a flame. The curtain glowed, then darkened. We can't accuse him without proof, Tommy said. Then we'll get proof, said Tuppence, tonight if necessary. Darling, he said mildly, you realize we're halfway to being arrested ourselves. At least we'll have company, she replied. Later, as they sat once more in their flat, Tommy poured 2 whiskies. The clock struck 8. Let's review, he said. Miss Dane dies. Apparent suicide. Note smells of lavender, not her scent. Ink wrong. Envelope addressed to Dr. Gray. Possible staging by someone wanting to implicate him. Merivale burns papers. Mrs. Hogg hovers. And somewhere in all that is our invisible blackmailer. Invisible, said Tuppence, but scented. Lavender again. You're obsessed with that smell. Because it follows the killer like a calling card. Tommy raised his glass. Then here's to lavender, the trail that won't fade. But Tuppence didn't smile. Her gaze had drifted to the window where the reflection of the courtyard lamp trembled against the glass. Tommy, she said softly. She was right. Who? Iris Dane. Someone has died because we pried too far, and unless we stop, there'll be another. You're not suggesting we give up? No, she said, her voice steady. I'm suggesting we start fighting back. She lifted her glass, eyes gleaming in the lamplight, to justice, and to the next move. Across the courtyard, the light in Colonel Merivale's flat went out, plunging his window into darkness, and from somewhere down the corridor came the faintest echo, the rhythmic swish of a cloth on wood, the unmistakable perfume of lavender following it like a ghost. The knock came at dusk, not urgent but deliberate, the kind that carried guilt behind it. Tommy opened the door to find Dr. Leonard Gray standing in the corridor, collar undone, his face pale as parchment. "May I come in?" he asked. Tuppence gestured toward the fire. "You'd better. You look as though you've seen your own ghost." "I might have," he muttered, stepping inside. He sank into the armchair opposite the hearth. The lamplight caught the tremor of his hands. Outside, the world carried on politely. Footsteps, the lift's slow groan. While inside, something much uglier pressed for air. "You're right," he said finally. "I've been blackmailed." Tuppence exchanged a brief glance with Tommy. Not triumph, but confirmation. "How long?" she asked. 3 months, maybe more. I've lost track." He rubbed his forehead. "The first letter came in June, typed, unsigned. Said I'd forged a death certificate during the war. Said they had proof." "Did you?" Tommy asked quietly. Gray's eyes flickered. "Yes." The admission hung heavy in the room. "It wasn't for gain," he added quickly. "It was for mercy. There was a soldier, fever, pneumonia. He was dying. Command wanted the paperwork tidy. They told me to sign, to save a scandal about medical neglect. I was young, frightened. I signed." "And someone kept the evidence," said Tuppence. "A copy of the certificate. It vanished from the records years ago. I thought the past was buried, until the letters started arriving." "Demanding money?" "Not at first. They wanted silence, then payment. £100, then 2. I paid what I could, then refused. The threats changed. They said they'd expose me to the Board of Health, to the papers, to—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "To Iris." "Miss Dane," said Tuppence softly. He nodded. "She knew me from France. We worked together on the theatre corps tours. She knew about the forged certificate. She was there when I signed it. I always wondered if she was the one writing the letters. But last week she begged me for help, said she was trapped by someone else, and now she's dead." Tuppence leaned forward. "Then you believe she was murdered?" "Of course she was. Iris was vain, dramatic, but she wouldn't take her own life. Not like that." "Who would want her silenced?" Gray hesitated, then said the name as though it burned his tongue. "Merivale." Tommy sat back. "The Colonel?" "He was there in France, too. He ordered me to falsify that certificate. Said it was for the honour of the regiment. He's the only man who could have known enough to blackmail me. And Iris, she hinted she'd seen him again recently, that he was desperate for money. Pensions cut, debts mounting." "You're suggesting a war hero turned extortionist?" asked Tommy. "I'm suggesting desperation turns anyone," Gray said bitterly. Tuppence studied him. His story fit the pattern, but too neatly. "Doctor," she said gently, "why come to us now? Why not the police?" "Because the police believe Iris killed herself. They'd never believe she was murdered over a 20-year-old forgery." "And you?" He looked up, haunted. "Because I think whoever killed her will come for me next." Tommy poured him a whiskey. Gray's fingers shook so badly he sloshed it onto his sleeve. The faintest scent rose from the damp patch. Lavender. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Doctor," she said quietly, "do you mind if I see your handkerchief?" He frowned. "What?" "It's an odd request, I know, but humour me." He fumbled in his pocket and produced a neatly folded square of linen. She took it, raising it to her nose. Lavender again. Strong and recent. "A popular scent in this building," she said lightly. "I suppose Mrs. Hogg uses it on everything," he replied nervously. "Does she polish your conscience with it too?" Tommy asked dryly. Gray blinked. "I don't understand." Tuppence reached behind her and drew something from her handbag. A second handkerchief, identical but marked with a faint monogram. "This," she said, laying it beside the first, "was found in your desk drawer when we looked in your surgery earlier today." His face drained of colour. "That's impossible," he whispered. "It's not mine. You keep lavender-scented linen in your desk purely by accident. I tell you, it isn't mine." His voice cracked. "She planted it." The pronoun hung in the air like smoke. "She?" repeated Tuppence softly. Gray's hands clenched. "Mrs. Hogg," he said at last. "Who else? She cleans the flats. She's in every room, every drawer. She sees the post, hears the quarrels, smells the secrets. You think anyone could drop a handkerchief or a letter without her knowing?" Tommy leaned forward. "You're suggesting your landlady is the blackmailer?" "Or the accomplice," said Gray. "She's clever, pretends to be simple, but nothing happens here without her noticing." "Then why target you?" "Money," he said bitterly. "And control. She thrives on fear. Perhaps she was working for someone else, but she's the one who delivered the letters. Who else had access to every flat?" "Including Iris Daines," Tuppence murmured. "Exactly. She could have slipped in that night, drugged her tea, staged the note, and she'd have had the lavender polish ready to mask the scent of the draft. It's always on her hands." "Yet you never accused her," Tommy said. "I was afraid. She knows too much. She could destroy me with a word." For a long moment, the only sound was the hiss of the fire. Tuppence stood and walked to the window. Across the courtyard, Mrs. Hogg's flat glowed faintly. A silhouette moved inside, short, bustling, unmistakable. "Tommy," she said quietly, "if what the doctor says is true, we're living under the thumb of the most efficient gossip in London." "The Queen of Lavender," he murmured. Behind them, Gray groaned softly. "I've said too much. If she suspects—" "She already suspects everything," said Tuppence. "That's her profession." He rose unsteadily. "I have patients waiting. I must go." "Doctor," said Tommy, blocking the door, "one last question. When you found Iris this morning, were you the first inside?" Gray hesitated. "Mrs. Hogg had the key. She let me in." "And she'd been there before you?" "She said she'd only knocked, but the door was unlocked." Tuppence's gaze met Tommy's. "Unlocked," she repeated softly. "You see?" Gray said desperately. "It was all arranged. I'm certain of it now." "Then you'd better leave the rest to us," said Tommy. He guided the trembling doctor out into the hall. The man's footsteps faded down the corridor, leaving the faint trail of lavender in his wake. Tuppence closed the door and turned back to the fire. "He's lying," said Tommy at once. "Of course he is," she said calmly. "But not about everything. The forgery's real. The blackmail's real. What I don't believe is that Mrs. Hogg planted that handkerchief." "Then who did?" "He did, to deflect suspicion. But it backfired, because he forgot we'd already smelled lavender on him before he touched the glass." "Meaning he's protecting someone else? Perhaps? Or obeying them?" "And Mrs. Hogg?" "She's dangerous, but not cunning enough for this scale. She knows the gossip, but someone else writes the script." "Merivale again?" "Maybe," said Tuppence. "Or perhaps the war still has more ghosts than we realized." Later that night, they crept downstairs under the pretense of a stroll. From behind Mrs. Hogg's half-open door came the faint scrape of furniture and the rhythmic swish of polishing. The scent hit them instantly. Lavender and beeswax, thick and sweet. "At this rate," Tommy whispered, "I'll never smell the stuff again without suspecting murder." Tuppence smiled faintly. "Good. It means we're getting close." As they turned to climb back upstairs, a voice drifted from behind the door, Mrs. Hogg's humming tunelessly. Then, distinctly, a few words spoken aloud as if to an unseen companion. "He's cracking, the doctor is. Cracking nicely. Won't be long now." Tommy froze. Tuppence's eyes widened. They retreated silently, heartbeat by heartbeat, until they reached their own landing. Inside their flat, Tuppence pressed her back to the door, whispering, "Did you hear that?" "Every word," said Tommy. "Well, my love, it appears our landlady is not only observant, but theatrically malicious." "She's playing both sides," Tuppence said, "feeding the blackmailer and feeding the fear. And now she knows Dr. Gray's confessed. She'll tighten the noose." "Then we tighten ours first." "How?" Tommy smiled. "With bait of our own. If lavender draws the killer, we'll give them a scent they can't resist." Tuppence's answering smile was quick and sharp. "And I know exactly where to start, with Mrs. Hogg's stair rails." The plan was forming, silent and swift as thought. Beyond the window, South Audley Mansion slept, but its secrets were awake, whispering in lavender-scented air. The invitation came that morning, scrawled in rounded handwriting on a slip of notepaper. "Do come for a nice cup of tea, Mrs. Beresford. We women must keep up our strength in such trying times. Yours, Monsieur Hogg." Tuppence regarded it as though it were an unexploded shell. "Well," she said, "the trap has baited itself." Tommy folded his newspaper. "And you mean to spring it?" "Naturally. She wants to measure me. I shall bring my own yardstick." He grinned. "If you start measuring, do it before she serves the scones. I've never known poison presented with such efficiency." Tuppence smiled sweetly. "That's why I'm going alone." Mrs. Hogg's flat was on the ground floor, a warren of lace curtains, porcelain cats, and the overpowering perfume of lavender polish. The smell met Tuppence halfway down the corridor, heavy as guilt. The door opened before she knocked twice. Mrs. Hogg herself stood framed in the doorway, a figure of solid cheerfulness in floral print and pearls. Her smile could have been carved from icing sugar. "My dear Mrs. Beresford, how kind of you to come. I was just saying to myself, what a lonely building this is since poor Miss Dane passed on. Do come in. Mind the rug. The corner curls something dreadful." Tuppence stepped over it carefully, eyes taking in every detail. The polished mahogany gleamed like mirrors. The air shimmered faintly with heat and scent. Even the clock on the mantel seemed to tick through lavender. "Such a tragedy," Mrs. Hogg continued, bustling to the tea table. "I always say, actresses feel too deeply. Everything's a performance, even despair." "Yes," said Tuppence mildly, accepting a chair. "Though I confess I thought Miss Dane seemed more frightened than despairing." Mrs. Hogg poured tea with unhurried precision. "Frightened, yes, of shadows, of gossip, of her own conscience, perhaps. One never knows what burdens a lady carries under all that rouge." "No, indeed," said Tuppence, watching the steady hands. "Milk, thank you. 2 lumps." They sat amid the gentle clink of china. Through the open window came the faint murmur of traffic and a pigeon's cooing. It might have been an ordinary afternoon between neighbours, except for the faint tension vibrating under each syllable. "Your flat is delightful," Tuppence said, setting her cup down. "You've a gift for keeping things spotless." Mrs. Hogg beamed. "My late husband used to say I could eat my dinner off the floor, and sometimes we had to during the Blitz." She laughed heartily. "It's habit, I suppose. I can't abide dirt or disorder, or secrets. They stain just as badly." "How true," said Tuppence. "You were in service once, weren't you? I remember you mentioning the Colonel's household." A faint shadow crossed the woman's face. "Ah, yes. Colonel Merivale's dear lady, God rest her soul. I was her housekeeper for near 10 years. Until her death? Until a little before." The smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned opaque. "There was a misunderstanding, shall we say. A bracelet went missing, a trifle really, and someone had to be blamed. I was dismissed quietly, of course. No fuss. But people talk. They always talk." "How unjust," murmured Tuppence. "Oh, I don't bear grudges," Mrs. Hogg said briskly, buttering a scone with military precision. "Still, it teaches one to be observant. If you watch carefully, people reveal what they are. I've learnt to read lives like ledgers." "That must be useful, managing a place like this," said Tuppence, voice airy. "All those tenants with their little dramas." Mrs. Hogg chuckled. "You'd be surprised. The Colonel's still as pompous as ever. Can't boil an egg without a parade. Dr. Gray keeps secrets in his desk that would curl your hair. And the actress, poor soul, well, she paid dearly for playing too many parts." "You speak as if you knew what haunted her," said Tuppence, studying her closely. "A woman knows another woman's weaknesses," said Mrs. Hogg. "Miss Dane was tired of pretending. I warned her, 'Don't answer every letter that drops through your door,' but she wouldn't listen." Tuppence's pulse quickened. "Letters?" Mrs. Hogg's eyes glittered. "I collect the post, you know. It passes through my hands before anyone's breakfast. There's nothing I don't see. Names, handwriting, postmarks. You'd be amazed what people receive in the ordinary morning mail." "You must feel quite like a confessor." "Perhaps." Mrs. Hogg took a long, delicate sip. "Though I don't confess my own sins so easily." For a moment the silence stretched. Tuppence smiled, keeping her tone light. "I can't imagine you having any. You seem the very picture of moral health." "Appearances deceive, Mrs. Beresford," said the widow softly. But you of all people know that. Tuppence felt the words land with surgical accuracy. I beg your pardon? Oh, don't look so alarmed, my dear. I mean your curiosity. You've been asking questions, haven't you? Poking about in other people's lives. Such energy. It's admirable and dangerous. I prefer concerned. Mrs. Hogg smiled thinly. Concern has a scent, Mrs. Beresford. Yours is lavender. It lingers where you've been. Tuppence's fingers tightened around her cup. You polish the whole building with it. It's difficult not to carry a little away. Of course. The woman's gaze dropped to the teapot. One must keep up appearances. The right scent, the right shine. Otherwise people suspect neglect. Or worse. And what would worse be? Mrs. Hogg looked up. Her smile was gone. Meddling in other people's correspondence. The words were quiet, almost gentle, yet the temperature of the room seemed to fall. Tuppence set her cup down carefully. That's an odd accusation. Oh, not an accusation, my dear. A warning. You see, letters are like confessions. They belong to the writer and the sinner, no one else. Interfere, and you may find the devil's ink on your fingers. How poetical, said Tuppence, her own tone light but her heartbeat rapid. You make it sound as though the postbag hides souls as well as stamps. Sometimes it does. Mrs. Hogg leaned back, eyes half closed. This building has seen so much sorrow. Wartime secrets, debts, little deceits. People pay me to forget them, you know. A landlady hears things at the keyhole she never repeats. Unless she must. Unless she must, echoed Tuppence softly. And when must she? When someone threatens the peace of the house, when they stir up old ghosts, when they forget that I too have a reputation to keep. The clock chimed faintly. The air was thick with the perfume, almost cloying. You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Hogg, said Tuppence after a pause. I envy your knowledge. Knowledge is heavy, said the widow. Better to be ignorant and happy like your husband. Charming man, Mr. Beresford, so trusting, so talkative. Tuppence smiled without warmth. He has his virtues. Indeed. He's told the porter you're helping the police. He forgets walls have ears and tongues. Then you know everything, said Tuppence quietly. Mrs. Hogg folded her hands. Enough, and more than enough. For a moment, neither woman moved. The teapot steamed faintly between them like a peace offering neither intended to accept. Tuppence rose at last, smoothing her skirt. Thank you for the tea. It's been enlightening. Mrs. Hogg's smile returned, brittle and bright. Do come again, my dear. I always enjoy a nice chat. And do give my regards to the doctor. He looked so tired yesterday. You've seen him? He passed by early this morning. I expect he was on his way to the surgery. Early indeed, murmured Tuppence. Mrs. Hogg followed her to the door. Oh, before you go, she added sweetly, if you happen to find any letters lying about, you might bring them to me. I'd hate to see private correspondence fall into the wrong hands. Of course, said Tuppence, meeting her eyes, and I'll be careful not to read anything I shouldn't. Mrs. Hogg's laugh was soft and satisfied. Oh, I think you already have. The door closed with a quiet finality. Outside in the corridor, Tuppence stood for a long moment, breathing deeply. The smell of lavender clung to her clothes, stubborn as guilt. When she reached her own flat, Tommy was pacing. Well, are you poisoned, blackmailed, or converted to the cult of lavender? None, she said briskly, removing her gloves, but I've just taken tea with the devil in a floral apron. Mrs. Hogg? She knows everything, about Iris, the doctor, even us, and she's playing her part to perfection, friendly, pious, and perfectly poisonous. Did she slip? Once. She said she'd seen Dr. Gray this morning, though he swore he spent the night at his surgery, which means she's watching the building even when she pretends not to. Tommy whistled softly. And motive? Plenty. She was dismissed by Merivale's wife for theft, revenge. She's turned his respectability into her trade, collecting secrets instead of rent. And she knows we're onto her? Tuppence nodded slowly. She as much as said so. Don't meddle in other people's correspondence. Those were her exact words. Which means she's either threatening or confessing. Both, said Tuppence. She crossed to the window. Below, Mrs. Hogg was visible in the courtyard, hanging a basket of lavender on the rail. She looked up suddenly, meeting Tuppence's gaze with a small, satisfied smile. Tuppence let the curtain fall. "She's daring us to move next," she said. "Then we'll oblige," Tommy replied. "But gently. I'd rather not be served with scones and arsenic." "Nor I," she said softly. "But the game's turning, Tommy, and our landlady just declared herself hostess." "A trap," said Tommy, tapping his pipe against the ashtray. "Ought to be elegant, like a minuet, not a brawl." Tuppence, bent over the desk, didn't look up. "Then let's hope the mouse has taste enough to waltz into ours." The paper before her bore only 2 lines in her crisp typing. "I can no longer remain silent. The past must be confessed. At midnight, I shall deliver the truth to the authorities." She slid it into an envelope and addressed it, in steady block capitals, to Inspector Bligh, Scotland Yard. "That should do," she said, sealing it. "Nothing like a little bureaucratic melodrama to tempt the guilty." Tommy grinned. "And you're sure Mrs. Hogg will take the bait?" "Oh, she'll bite. The mere thought of a confession makes her salivate. Besides, Albert will see to that." "Our faithful Mercury," said Tommy. "Does he understand the delicate nature of his role?" "He thinks it's theatre," said Tuppence dryly. "And he's right. This building deserves an audience." Albert, suitably briefed and delighted by the intrigue, performed his part with exuberant gusto. That afternoon he accidentally delivered the decoy letter to Colonel Merivale's flat, loudly enough in the corridor for Mrs. Hogg polishing her banisters with predatory slowness to hear, and loudly enough for the doctor's door to catch it as well. "Beg pardon, sir," Albert announced in ringing tones. "Urgent letter from Scotland Yard. Says something about a confession and a meeting at midnight." Mrs. Hogg's polishing stopped mid-swipe. Her head turned, eyes glinting beneath the lace of her cap. "Midnight, you say?" she echoed sweetly. Albert blinked innocently. "That's what it says, ma'am. Scotland Yard don't mince words, do they?" Her smile was too pleasant. "No, indeed, young man. They never do." By 9 o'clock that night, the Beresfords had the building mapped like a battlefield. They'd chosen the second-floor landing, a dim corner between the Colonel's door and the stairwell. A single candle flickered on a small table, an old blackout precaution now repurposed as stage lighting. Tommy checked his watch. 10 minutes to 12. Our leading lady should be taking her mark. Tuppence adjusted the dark shawl around her shoulders. "You sound altogether too cheerful. Remember, this isn't amateur dramatics. It's possible murder." "You're forgetting," he said lightly. "Amateur dramatics often are murder." She smiled despite herself. "Hush, listen." The building was mostly asleep. Somewhere below, a clock ticked. A door creaked faintly in the distance. The candle flame trembled as though it too were listening. Then came the sound, soft, deliberate footsteps ascending from the ground floor. Slow, pausing at each landing like a cat measuring the dark. Tuppence's hand tightened around Tommy's sleeve. "She's coming." The steps reached their floor. Through the gloom, the outline of a woman emerged, stout, deliberate, carrying a small glass vial that glinted in the faint light. Mrs. Hogg moved soundlessly to Colonel Merivale's door. Her free hand withdrew a ring of keys from her pocket. The metal chimed softly. Tommy whispered, "We catch her red-handed and ring for the police." But before he could move, another door clicked open. Colonel Merivale stepped out in dressing gown and slippers, a revolver clutched in one shaking hand. His face, ghost pale, was set with desperate resolve. "Stop where you are, woman," he barked. Mrs. Hogg froze. The vial trembled between her fingers. "Colonel, you gave me a fright." "You meant to give me something far worse," he said hoarsely. "I know what's in that bottle." "Nonsense," she said, her tone syrupy. "A little sleep tonic, that's all. You've been restless." "Don't lie to me." The gun wavered. "You came to finish what you began with Miss Dane." Tuppence stepped from the shadows. "Put the gun down, Colonel." Both figures spun toward her. "Mrs. Beresford," gasped Mrs. Hogg. "What are you doing, skulking about like a burglar?" "Research," said Tuppence calmly. "I do like to see people in their natural habitats." Tommy appeared behind her, closing off the stairwell. "Evening all. Lovely night for an ambush." The Colonel's hand trembled. You planned this?" "We prefer staged it," said Tuppence. "The letter to Scotland Yard was a forgery. We wanted to see who'd panic first." Mrs. Hogg's eyes narrowed. "So you thought to trick me? Clever children." "Children with witnesses," said Tommy. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Hogg gave a sudden small laugh and flung the vial to the floor. It shattered, releasing a sharp, sweet vapour. "Chloroform!" cried Tuppence, covering her mouth. The fumes spread quickly. Tommy stumbled back, coughing. The Colonel, startled, dropped his revolver. It clattered across the tiles. Tuppence lunged forward, pulling a handkerchief to her face, and kicked the pistol away. "Tommy, open a window!" He staggered toward the stairwell, forcing the window latch. The night air rushed in, scattering the mist. When the haze cleared, Mrs. Hogg lay crumpled beside the door, unconscious. The Colonel was slumped against the wall, trembling violently. "Good heavens," murmured Tuppence. "It worked, though not quite as rehearsed." Tommy bent over Mrs. Hogg. "Alive," he said, merely overcome by her own theatrics. "Let's hope she enjoys irony," said Tuppence. "Now," she turned to Merivale. "Colonel, would you care to explain why you were waiting with a gun?" He stared at her with bloodshot eyes. "Because I knew she'd come. She's been blackmailing me for years." "We rather suspected," said Tommy mildly. "I couldn't bear it any longer," the old soldier said brokenly. "The letters, the threats, all about that damned incident in France. I forged the order myself, not Grey. He only signed what I told him to. And she," he pointed at Mrs. Hogg's still form, "she found out. She kept me in terror, said she'd expose me as a coward, a liar. God help me, it's true." "She knew about the forged certificate?" asked Tuppence. "Yes. My wife's brother died under my command. I falsified the report to protect her. Mrs. Hogg discovered it later when she was in our service. She threatened to tell my wife unless I paid. I paid for 20 years. He dropped his face into his hands. "When Iris came back into my life, Mrs. Hogg saw her chance again. Said Iris would expose me too, that she'd seen the paperwork. I refused to pay. The next day, Iris was dead." "So, you suspected Mrs. Hogg killed her," said Tommy. "Yes, but I had no proof. And if I accused her, she'd tell the world what I'd done. I thought," he looked at them helplessly, "I thought tonight I might frighten her into stopping." "A risky tactic," said Tuppence, "and very nearly fatal." Mrs. Hogg stirred faintly. Tuppence knelt beside her, removing the keys from her pocket. "She won't be polishing banisters for a while," she said. "What will you do with me?" Merivale asked hollowly. "That depends," said Tuppence. "If you tell the truth now, perhaps the law will treat it as conscience rather than guilt." He gave a shuddering sigh. "You've no idea what the war did to men like me. Honour, reputation, they became currency. We traded them for survival." "And Mrs. Hogg collected the change," Tommy said grimly. "Yes," Merivale whispered. "She listened, she learned, she remembered. When my wife died, she came back into my life as a landlady of all things. Said she'd forgiven the past. I was fool enough to believe her." "Until the letters began," said Tuppence. "Until the letters began," he echoed. They carried Mrs. Hogg into the Colonel's sitting room and laid her on the sofa. The air smelled faintly of polish and chloroform, the twin signatures of her reign. Tommy lit another candle. Its flame threw long shadows across the bookshelves, over the old regimental photographs. The Colonel sat motionless, staring into them as though seeing ghosts. Tuppence moved to the writing desk. A small stack of letters lay inside, carbon copies on thin blue paper, each bearing the same unmistakable type. "So the machinery was here all along," she murmured, "her weapon and her workshop." Tommy glanced at the unconscious woman. "Hard to blackmail anyone from a prison cell." "Or from a coffin," said Tuppence quietly. "Meaning?" "That vial might have been meant for him, or for us. But look at the rim." She picked up a shard of glass with a handkerchief. Powder residue, cyanide perhaps. Chloroform was the carrier. Tommy let out a low whistle. So she meant to silence the Colonel, permanently. "And make it look like suicide, no doubt," said Tuppence. "Her masterpiece of housekeeping, cleaning up after herself." The Colonel groaned softly. "I'll tell the police everything. I'm finished with silence." "That," said Tuppence, "is the first decent thing you've done in years." The rest unfolded with weary efficiency. Albert, roused from his post in the basement, telephoned Inspector Bligh. Within the hour, South Audley Mansions was swarming with police. Mrs. Hogg was carried out on a stretcher, reviving just long enough to hiss something indecipherable through clenched teeth. The Colonel, trembling but composed, gave his statement in full. Grey was summoned, pale but relieved, to confirm the old forgery. The pieces fit together at last. Greed, guilt, revenge, all polished bright under lavender scent. When dawn came, the Beresfords sat in their flat, the first grey light creeping through the curtains. The building was quiet again, emptied of ghosts. Tommy poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Tuppence. "Well, partner," another domestic drama concluded. Poison, deceit and polish, all in a day's work. "And all because of lavender," she said softly. "We'll have to move," he sighed. "I can't live in a building that smells like murder." Tuppence smiled faintly. "On the contrary, darling, lavender cleanses, though, in the end." He raised his cup. "To cleanliness, then." "And to correspondence," she added. "May we never meddle in it again." "Oh, we will," said Tuppence. "We always do." Outside, the street stirred to life, milk cart rattling, a paper boy calling headlines. But inside South Audley Mansions, the scent of lavender still lingered, faint and stubborn, like the echo of a confession whispered too late. Morning drifted into South Audley Mansions like an apology. The commotion of the night before had faded, leaving behind a hush that smelt faintly of disinfectant and, inevitably, lavender. A constable still guarded the front door, helmet tilted at a weary angle. The newspapers hadn't yet caught the scent of scandal. London mercifully remained ignorant, for now. In the Beresfords' sitting room the hearth crackled with fresh coal. Tuppence sat on the rug before it, sleeves rolled up, a small tin box open beside her knee. Inside lay the remaining letters, typewritten threats, perfumed ghosts of greed and guilt. She struck a match. Tommy, leaning in the doorway with coffee in hand, watched the first flame curl through the paper. "There goes your evidence, he said. "There goes her power," Tuppence corrected. "I promised Inspector Bligh copies, not relics. I've no wish to keep souvenirs of other people's misery." "Quite right," Tommy agreed, "though a collector might pay handsomely for authentic blackmail correspondence. We could start a new business. Beresford and Company, dealers in moral artifacts." She gave him a look. "You're impossible." "Admit it. Tempting. Genuine guilt, slightly singed, lavender-scented. We'd make a fortune." "You'd make an idiot of yourself, as usual," she said, though her mouth softened into a smile. The letters crumbled one by one, curling into black lace before falling to ash. A final wisp of smoke rose, fragrant and oddly peaceful. "Eau d'extorsion," Tommy mused. "Could be the latest thing in Paris." Tuppence threw a burnt match at him. "Do stop talking nonsense." Inspector Bligh had come and gone before breakfast, satisfied that Mrs. Hogg's confession matched the evidence they'd seized on the Colonel's desk and in Mrs. Hogg's drawer the night before. Her little empire of lavender and lies had collapsed neatly. Ledgers, typewriter, and poison vial all accounted for. She would stand trial, though the papers would call it a domestic tragedy. It sounded so much tidier that way. Colonel Merivale had been driven away under discreet escort. The Home Office, anxious to protect an old soldier's honour, preferred compassion to headlines. His forged orders would be buried in an anonymous file, and his name, once engraved on a brass plaque, would fade quietly into institutional forgetfulness. Dr. Gray had resigned before anyone could dismiss him. A brief notice would appear in the Lancet. Dr. Leonard Gray, late of South Audley Mansions, retiring on grounds of health. The line between disgrace and convalescence was pleasantly blurred. "They all escape," Tommy remarked, reading the morning edition. "One to prison, one to purgatory, one to some seaside nursing home. Only we remain, gallant and unpaid." "We didn't do it for pay," said Tuppence. "No," he sighed, folding the paper. "We did it for entertainment. And you must admit, it was frightfully entertaining, if one overlooks the chloroform." Tuppence stirred her coffee. "I keep thinking of Mrs. Hogg. She wasn't clever enough to invent blackmail, only disciplined enough to manage it, a landlady's precision applied to sin." "That's the trouble with efficiency," Tommy said. "Sooner or later one applies it to the wrong profession." She smiled faintly. "You're becoming philosophical. Perhaps I should worry." "Nonsense. I'm merely hungry. Fritz would have given us sausages. Albert offers toast, like blotting paper." By late afternoon, the winter light slanted gold across the mantel, gilding the framed photograph of their younger selves. Tommy in uniform, Tuppence in an extravagant hat. The fire had burnt low. Only the faintest whiff of lavender lingered, clean now, almost innocent. Tuppence reached for the poker, stirring the ashes. Among them glimmered a half-charred scrap, the ghost of a typewritten line. "Forgive me, I can't pay any more." She hesitated, then pressed it gently into the flames until it was gone. Tommy watched her. "You're sentimental, really." "No, just thorough." He raised his cup in mock salute. "To thorough women. May they never run out of mysteries." "And to foolish men who marry them," she said. "Foolish? Visionary, I'd say. Imagine life without you. No murders, no clues, no nightly adventures." "You'd be bored within a week," she said, but her tone was affectionate. "Still, perhaps a little ordinary life wouldn't hurt us. No corpses, no blackmailers, just dinners and bills and, what's that modern word? Stability." "My dear Tuppence," Tommy said gravely, "ordinary life with you is never ordinary. You're a walking conspiracy." She laughed, the sound clear and warm in the quiet room. "Then let's drink to it anyway." He lifted his cup again. "To ordinary married life. May it last precisely until the next letter arrives." "Heaven forbid," she said lightly. "I've had quite enough correspondence to last a lifetime." Outside, London went about its evening, omnibuses rumbling, milk vans clinking, the city restoring its polite facade. Somewhere in a police archive, a sealed envelope was filed under H, marked Hogg, Margaret, extortion, closed case. Somewhere else, the Colonel's record was quietly amended, the past rewritten in bureaucratic shorthand. And in one modest flat, 2 detectives sat contentedly amid cooling teacups and the soft tick of the clock. "Do you ever wonder," Tommy said after a while, "why we stumble into these things? We go looking for excitement, and it invariably looks back." "Because we're curious," said Tuppence, "and curiosity, like lavender, is hard to kill." He considered that. "Then here's to lavender, pervasive, persistent, occasionally poisonous." "And sometimes cleansing," she added. They both smiled. For a rare moment, peace settled around them, men, curling like sunlight through smoke. Then came the sound, a brisk double knock at the door, followed by the familiar shuffle of the postman's boots. The letter slot clinked, and an envelope slid neatly to the carpet. Tuppence groaned. "If that's the gas bill, I'll faint from relief." Tommy stooped, picked it up, and frowned. The envelope was unmarked. No stamp, no handwriting, only a faint trace of lavender when he turned it in his hand. He looked at her. "My love, I believe Providence disapproves of dullness." Tuppence sighed, sinking back into her chair. "Oh, bother," she said. "Not again." Tommy's grin was wicked. "Shall I fetch the matches or the magnifying glass?" "Neither," she replied, reaching for the envelope. "Let's at least have our tea before the next adventure begins." The fire crackled softly as she broke the seal. Fade to theme.